There was no pharmacy in Chortitza colony. There didn't need to be. In 1789, when Catherine the Great gave these settlers their land on the Dnieper River, they brought something more valuable than seeds, a complete working medicine cabinet of 20 herbs handed down and written into recipe books by village healers called Habamen. Those same plants are growing in fields and roadsides right now. Most people walk past them every day and have no idea what they are looking at. So why don't we know the system? And why did a Soviet government spend real effort making sure we never learned it? Chortitza was not a village. It was a civilization in miniature. By the time Molochna colony was established in 1804, the second great Mennonite settlement along the southern steppe, these communities had developed something that most of the world still has not caught up to. Every village had its own school. Every village had its own healer. Not a doctor in the modern sense, a habami. A woman who knew the land the way other people know their own kitchen. Instinctively, precisely, without needing to look anything up. She handled births. She handled wounds. She handled fevers that would have killed people in the cities. And she did all of it with plants. This is where most people assume we are talking about folk superstition. Stay with me, because that assumption is exactly what the official version wanted you to walk away with. There is a notebook. It belonged to a healer named Anna Toes. It still exists. The handwriting is German script, the ink browned at the edges, with entries dated across decades. It is not a mystical document. It reads like a working manual, preparations for infection, for difficult births, for respiratory illness in winter, for wounds that would not close. Organized, detailed, cross-referenced. This was a woman who understood cause and mechanism, and who wrote it down because she knew that knowledge dies when people do. The notebook still exists. The colonies do not. That is the detail that matters, and we will come back to why. 20 plants. That's the system. And here's what's almost offensive about it. Most of them grow within a few miles of wherever you are sitting right now. You have probably walked past half of them this week. Start with elderberry. The Habamen strained it into syrup every autumn, bottled it, and stored it before winter hit. Not as a ritual, as preparation. In 1999, a randomized clinical trial run in Norway followed 60 patients through an influenza outbreak. The group taking elderberry extract recovered 4 days faster than the control group. 4 days. That is not a minor effect. That is the difference between missing a week of work and missing 2. Now, one later trial contradicted this finding. I am not going to pretend that trial does not exist. Stay with me, because that contradiction is actually the most interesting part of this story, and we are going to come back to it. Garlic. The Mennonites used it as a poultice for infected wounds, packed directly against the skin. During the Second World War, the Red Army was doing the same thing on the battlefield, so reliably that soldiers nicknamed it Russian penicillin. In 1944, 2 chemists named Cavallito and Bailey isolated the active compound allicin. Here is the mechanism, and it is simple. Allicin kills bacteria as a vapor at the microscopic level before the infection can establish. One compound, no pharmacy required, grows in any garden, costs almost nothing. Calendula. Orange-petaled, cheerful-looking, utterly overlooked. The Habamen infused the flowers in oil and used it on wounds. A 2019 systematic review across 14 studies confirmed faster healing, reduced inflammation, and documented bactericidal action against Staphylococcus aureus, one of the most dangerous wound pathogens in existence. This plant was in every Mennonite kitchen garden in Ukraine. It still grows as a weed across North America. It is not exotic. It is not difficult. It is sitting in a field somewhere near you right now. And then there's yarrow, named, according to legend, for Achilles, who used it to stop his soldiers bleeding out on the field at Troy. The hemostatic compound is called achillene. That's a real alkaloid, isolated and studied. The Mennonites called it shafgarba. You probably know it as that white-flowered weed that grows along roadsides and doesn't seem to die no matter what. They dried it, they steeped it, they pressed it against wounds. The antimicrobial action has since been confirmed in multiple studies. It was never a superstition, it was a practical tool, a free one. None of this is exotic, none of it costs money. All of it has been in front of us the entire time. So why did the Soviet government decide that the people practicing this system were criminals? Here's the part nobody tells you. In 1926, the Soviet government passed a law. One article, Article 180, embedded in the RSFSR criminal code, set to take effect on the first day of January 1927. It made the practice of healing without state-certified medical education a criminal offense, forced labor, or a fine of up to 500 rubles. That law wasn't aimed at quacks. It was aimed at every village Habami, in every Mennonite colony along the Dnieper, at Anatos, at every woman who knew which plant to reach for and why. They didn't become less effective overnight. They became illegal overnight. And that is where this story stops being about herbs. Article 180 didn't appear from nowhere. To understand what it actually did, you have to understand what came before it. In 1918, the Bolsheviks established the People's Commissariat of Public Health, Narkomzdrav, by decree. All medical institutions were nationalized. All physicians became state employees. The logic was clean and totalizing. The state owns medicine. The state defines medicine. Anything outside that definition is not medicine. It is superstition. It is fraud. It is, by 1927, a criminal act. The argument was never that the herbs didn't work. This is the detail that matters. The argument was that only the state got to decide what counted as medicine. The znakari, the folk healers across the Soviet Union, were prosecuted not because their patients weren't recovering. They were prosecuted because recovery outside the state system was ideologically inconvenient. The Mennonite village Habami was now legally a criminal. Anato's notebook was now legally evidence. But Article 180 was just the beginning, because something much larger was already in motion. Collectivization began in 1929. Mennonite farms built over 5 generations, some of the most productive agricultural land in Ukraine, were seized. Model farms were stripped, first by 60%, then again. And the men disappeared. 1 in 8 Mennonite men were removed to labor camps from which most never returned. Not 1 in 100, 1 in 8. Then came the exiles. The date is specific and the specificity matters. On the 8th of March 1930, International Women's Day, the Soviet calendar's celebration of women's liberation, 11 Mennonite families were loaded onto carts and sent east. There was a blinding snowstorm. The families included elders, children, midwives. The man who recorded it, Elder Daniel Boschman, watched it happen. They were sent to Siberia, the Omsk region, the Narim Taiga, places where the ground stays frozen half the year, and the nearest town is a day's walk. These were not fringe people. They were farmers and beekeepers, pastors and midwives. They were the people who kept the notebooks, who grew the calendula in rows along the kitchen garden, who knew which yarrow to harvest before the first frost and how long to steep it. When you exile the people and dismantle the villages, the knowledge travels with them or it disappears. And then came 1937. Helmut Hubert spent years documenting what happened at Halberstadt. His book is called 1937, Stalin's Year of Terror. Inside it are 1,962 names, Mennonite men and women imprisoned, exiled, or executed in a single year. Hundreds were taken to Halberstadt specifically. Their hands were bound behind their backs with wire. They were executed with a bullet to the back of the head. Pastors, school teachers, healers, the people who carried the written tradition of these communities. That's not a metaphor. That's a documented list. 1,962 names. When you kill the people and burn the villages, the knowledge goes with them. Except, here's where the story turns. Not all of it. Some of them got out. Some of the notebooks left Russia in coat pockets, in the lining of luggage, in the memories of women who had spent decades memorizing what they could not risk writing down. The knowledge scattered to Canada, to Paraguay, to the Mennonite communities of the American plains. And the plants, of course, had never needed anyone's permission. They kept growing along the roadsides, in the fields, in the cracks between everything the modern world built over them. This is where the Soviet state's own record becomes the sharpest irony in this entire story. While Article 180 was prosecuting folk healers across the Union, the siege of Leningrad began. 1941, a city of nearly 3 million people, blockaded, starving, cut off from supply lines for almost 900 days. And the Leningrad Institute of Vitamin Industry did something remarkable. They went back past the state medical system, back past the approved pharmaceutical catalog, back to an 18th century method, pine needle extract pressed with acid, the vitamin C released into a drinkable decoction, 100 to 200 milliliters a day, enough to hold scurvy back from a population on the edge of starvation. The Soviet state outlawed folk medicine in 1927. The Soviet military was using folk medicine to survive in 1942. That is not a contradiction they ever had to explain publicly, but it is in the record. Chamomile. The German Commission E, the scientific body that evaluated herbal medicine for the German government, formally approved chamomile for inflammatory conditions and wound therapy. In one controlled clinical trial, chamomile cream outperformed 0.5% hydrocortisone in treating eczema after 2 weeks. Plantain leaf, the flat-leafed weed that grows in every footpath and lawn, was documented in a 2014 ethnobotany study by Brown, McClatchy, and Bridges specifically within plain Mennonite communities, confirming its medicinal use had survived the 20th century intact. Burdock leaf, the basis of the Mennonite and Amish burn treatment, known as B&W, is still actively used and still documented in peer-reviewed qualitative research across 5 American states. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because the honesty is part of the point. Nettle has real nutritional value, iron, vitamins, but the antibacterial claims that circulate online are not supported by systematic review. The evidence isn't there. Comfrey works topically on bruises, on sprains, but it carries liver toxicity if taken internally, and that matters. Not every one of these 20 is equal. I'm not asking you to believe they are. I'm asking you to notice what happens when researchers actually look. Most of them hold up. Here's the $0 medicine cabinet. Elderberry syrup strained in autumn and stored. Garlic packed into a cloth and pressed against infection. Calendula flowers dried and infused in oil. Yarrow steeped and applied to a wound that won't stop bleeding. Chamomile flowers dried and steeped for 10 minutes. Plantain leaf pressed fresh against a sting or a cut. Burdock leaf laid against a burn. These are not exotic preparations. They require no prescription, no supply chain, no monthly subscription. They require a patch of ground and the knowledge of what you're looking at. That knowledge is what was lost, not by accident. Now return to the notebook. Anna Toz's recipe book survived the destruction of Chortitza colony, survived the 1930 exiles, survived the executions at Halberstadt in 1937 and 1938 because it left Russia in someone's coat pocket. That is not a romanticization. That is what happened to Mennonite documents. They were carried out by people who understood that what was written down was more durable than the places that had been built. The notebook exists today because someone made a decision in the middle of a catastrophe that this was worth saving. Chortitza, 1789. Article 180 in 1926. The 8th of March, 1930, a blizzard, and 11 families on carts heading east. 1,962 names in a book that took years to compile. A pine needle decoction, keeping a blockaded city from dying of scurvy, while the law classified the people who knew that method as criminals. And a handwritten notebook, ink browning at the edges, that made it out when the colony didn't. That's not a conspiracy. That's a paper trail. The kind of person who watches a video like this isn't waiting for a system to hand them back what that system spent a century deciding they didn't need to know. You're the kind of person who goes looking for what was there before the decision was made. That's the only way any of this survived at all, because someone, somewhere, decided it was worth keeping. Which of these 20 are already growing near you? Drop your location in the comments. I want to build a map of where this system still lives. And next, the Mennonite water system that made colonial wells last 200 years. The construction method. The lining material. The reason modern municipal engineers stopped mentioning it in public, and exactly when that conversation went quiet. That one goes even deeper.